Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tedi Begaj. I've been with med school tutors for a long time, and it's actually an honor and a privilege to be doing this live Facebook event with you, discussing some tips, some ways in which we can achieve some success in the interviews during med school applications. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the outline that we're going to do today. I'll have a little introduction about myself, tell you a little bit of who I am, what I'm doing, as well as answer some questions as they come in. And then we'll talk about some general tips. We'll field questions. And then we'll talk about the difference between one-on-one interviews versus multiple mini interviews, which are becoming more and more popular these days. And then we'll kind of wrap it up there, field some other questions that come in towards later in the broadcast. So I'm Teddy. I'm a second year resident in Boston. I'm in ophthalmology. I've been part of med school tutors now. It's getting close to 4 years. It's really been an amazing privilege and honor to work with incredible students in these last few years. I have some experience in med school admissions at my medical school, University of Massachusetts Medical School. There were 2 students selected every year to be part of the admissions committee, to be a voting member. So we would read the applicant's primary and secondary application. We would discuss among ourselves. We would invite for interviews. We would be part of the interview process, and then we'd make the decision at the end. It was a really humbling experience getting to read about the most amazing applicants, how people are really involved globally, not even in their own community, but really in global health. All of the activities that they're doing, their passion, their hunger for medicine. So I learned a lot. It was a tremendous opportunity. And I thought I'd share a little bit of that experience with you today. So I think an important aspect to talk about, and as I start seeing more and more questions, I'll discuss them, is some general tips for the actual interview day. So, I mean, you've made it this far. Getting an interview is no easy task. So you really have to be proud of yourself for that. But then you also have to understand the gravity of that, which is that this is an amazing opportunity. And I think preparation is the number one topic that is the most important to discuss today. And I think generally, people have always thought about preparation kind of in interesting manners. Like, well, if I memorize the answers to these 50 questions, then it kind of looks like robotic. It doesn't look like I'm honest in answering these questions that they've generated, as opposed to being, kind of off the cuff. But I think that unless there was a question that said, what are you interested in? And then you just stood there and looked like this and said, I am interested in, helping people, then of course that looks contrived, you prepared for it, not passionate. But I think having preparation plus the enthusiasm is the key, because you have very little precious time with interviewers, and they know that it's a nervous situation. People, it's hectic, it's stressful, and so therefore there's not a lot of time to generate kind of like a cohesive thought, a reasonable argument to some question if they pose you something. So to kind of minimize all of that, the thought is preparing ahead of time. There's so many books, or even just like Googling like top 50 questions, looking at them. I think it also teaches a lot about yourself. What am I interested in? Why do I want to be a doctor? What are the things that I really enjoy about medicine? What are some strengths that I see in myself? What are some weaknesses? I think an important aspect as well is to kind of look at yourself and see how is it that you portray like answering some questions, which is just really a way that people are judging, or they're trying to understand how you will be with patients. And you could be absolutely fantastic. But if you don't portray it that day, then unfortunately it gets lost. So it's an important thing to just practice. Number one, knowing which kind of questions are, and there's so many different, just even, if you just Google a website, if you just Google like top 50 questions, looking at those questions, knowing what could come at you, just for more peace of mind than anything. Then preparing some answers to those questions. You need not memorize them and just robotically say them, but at least you have a strong base and you become cohesive in a very short time that you're interviewing. And then finally, having somebody, a significant other, some friends, family members, give you some feedback on how is it that you're coming across when you answer these questions, because there's such a short time during the interview, and there's so many applicants, that you really want to give it your best. And that's very logical, but sometimes can be difficult to do. I think knowing your CV very well, because people, they won't talk about everything, but they might talk about something that they're interested in or they're passionate in. And the more you can portray in clear words exactly what's written on there, some activity, some sport that you played, research, community outreach, I think that looks much, much better than kind of some vague description that's been written. I think you really have to know well either research. I think if you have done research, I think you have to know really well your outreach. So extra scholarly activities, you need to know them well. And you've done them, so there's nobody that knows them better than you. This is another tip. Some questions that I've gotten previously are, how do I know it's a stressful situation, how do I prepare for that? And I think the answer is you just need to take the time to relax, and really, you don't need to reply eagerly every single time as soon as they end the question. I think a flowing conversation between two people, whether it's the one-on-ones, which we'll talk about, or the multiple mini interviews where you have a very short time with many, many other people, usually like 6 or 8 people, it can be a conversation. It's not a test that you're filling out answers as fast as possible and having as much time to double check them. So take the time to think about a question, and then just answer it as honestly as you can. I think, if I don't know the answer to this question, of course that's very stressful. But there's honestly very few times during interviews where you have to be, precise, and you have to be so correct that it induces stress. So the key is being honest in your answers. And people are not going to ask you like really any medicine questions, and they're certainly not. You're not in medicine. You'll have plenty of that all over your career. But they're going to ask you things that they want to see your passions, they want to see your empathy, how they are trying to understand how you're going to talk to patients at the bedside. Because at the end of the day, as you're growing, become more and more senior, they're going to rely on you more and more to take care of their patients. These are all attendings. And so they work closely with residents and fellows and medical students. And so you're kind of, sometimes you're the core. And so it's very important. So that's kind of what they're thinking. And answering honestly means that there's no right or wrong. And therefore, there shouldn't really be stressful, because that's exactly what you were thinking. And I think people appreciate that. So you get kind of a difficult question, let's say, that maybe you don't know that well. Taking the time, thinking about it for a second, and then just answering as honestly as you can. With some, and then so people, and then I've said this to some students. They said, "What do you mean by that?" Well, one question that I remember that I got was, what do you think of the iPhone? And this was like around 2011, 2012, and the iPhone just came out in 2008, and so it was kind of growing. It was like 3, iPhone 4. It was getting faster, way more powerful. More people were using it. So somebody asked me, what do you think of the iPhone? And, there's no way I could read their mind and give a precise and correct answer. So I just took some time, which I thought was a very interesting question. And then I just essentially said, well, I think there's some really great benefits, but I also think there are some drawbacks. And then for benefits, I talked about how it's amazing to have this piece of technology in your hand at all times for you to be able to read and learn and interact with the world. And then at the same time, people are really distracted when it comes to their family members. And I talked about my brother, how he's always on his phone, etc. And maybe there's a little bit of a bigger gap. I'm more on my phone for sure. I'm not reading as many books. So there's no correct answer. I just answered as honest as I could. And I think they appreciated that. So that was great. Something else that I think is important is passion. To portray passion in your interviews. And actually, sometimes it's hard to do because people are nervous and they're a little bit scared, especially in the beginning where they haven't done it before. There's all these amazing people that are surrounding them. There are these, like gods, these medical gods who know so much, and so it's hard to like find the energy. But I think the important thing is that they are kind of assessing what they're thinking about is, this person has strong grades. You've made it that far. This person is involved in this person is multidimensional, involved in the community, played some sports, has volunteered, maybe has done some research. So at that level, at that point, there's not really any need to kind of justify yourself anymore. But what is needed is the idea that, well, these people, they're looking for, there's so many applicants, how are they going to choose between them? So many of them are so good. So many people have good grades, multidimensional, with volunteering, research, science, sports, instruments. I think a big delineating aspect is passion and enthusiasm. And so if you can try to work on that, I think that would be really great. And so how could one work on that? Well, I think so preparation, because if you at least know kind of some thoughts about how you're going to answer a question, then at least you're not worried about, am I talking correctly? Is it clear? Is it logical? Those go away, and then you can just involve just kind of your passions, smiling, keeping good posture, maintaining good eye contact, and then of course honesty. And then so if you're honest, meaning that you're just discussing them what you think, can't go wrong. Can't be wrong. It's just what you think. And so that sets you up to be empathetic, to be passionate, to show them that you really care about the fact that they've invited you here. It's just an amazing privilege and honor, in all honesty. So I think those are the keys. I'm just making sure that there are some questions. Another question that I get is, should I, on the interview days, should I look up as much as I can about the school, and or should I, so kind of generic information, or should I just go there that day, try to soak in some information, and then potentially ask some questions? So I think there's no really any wrong way to go about it, but I just think that asking questions, just kind of like the last tip from like the general points that we've talked about, is extremely important, because I think it just shows to them that you actually care. They know that multiple schools have invited you. Most people get certainly more than one interview. Maybe they get 2, maybe they get 4, maybe they get 5. So they know, or maybe 10, who knows? They know that this is not the one and only. And so now that you go into other schools, and they know that it's difficult. Many institutions are just so great. So I think the key is to have done a little bit of research about the institutions. Also because like you're going to make a decision later on, and the decision should only be from just interviewing that day. You'll learn about the school from tours. You'll interact with the medical students there that day. But I think doing a little bit of research beforehand is great. And then coming up with 5 questions, some number of questions that are, again, in honesty, what you want to know about the institutions. And they don't need to be like, oh, tell me about the research track and how I can publish this. It doesn't have to be so quantifiable. I think even some abstract things. I remember one time, and during one of my interviews, that one of the professors there had played soccer professionally, and so I just talked to him about, was there a community at the school where people could come together and like play some sports? And indeed there was. There were teams from each class that played together volleyball. There was like a little volleyball league in the medical school. They had a indoor soccer team composed from all the 4 years. Actually, it was really cool to hear about this. Not something you see online, not something you read about, they talk about that day, but gives you some insight about the community of the institution. And it was great. So that was just me thinking about like sports that I enjoy and asking them about that, as opposed to some research or some outreach, which are also very important as well. But it's good that you at least ask some questions. That's for sure. Okay, 101. Okay, so kind of changing gears and going from general tips to thinking about the day. So briefly, you'll go in the day. Please be early, 10 minutes. You don't have to be 30 minutes early, but just in case, leave yourself a gap just in case something happens. Many things happen. It's hard sometimes to find the areas where you need to be. So be a little early. You'll walk in usually to the middle school admissions office. There's usually a lovely person there who's just excited to see all these young and bright faces, just excited and a little bit nervous. There's you can feel the energy in the air. And from that time on, I think, the key is to really submerge yourself in the whole experience. So reading about what they give you, paying attention to what they're saying, looking around during the tours, interacting with the medical students, interacting with the other applicants. Sometimes it's really tough, I know, and it's hard to gauge the situation sometimes. Should I ask some questions? Should I not? Am I the only one who's asking questions? Am I talking too much? Am I not talking a little bit? It's difficult to navigate through this. But as long as you're kind of aware of what's going on around, you're not like using your phone, you're listening, you're being engaged, that's all that matters. Usually they'll have one-on-one interviews. A lot of schools still do one-on-one interviews where it's you and a faculty member. They'll give you who the faculty member is in the folder that day. They usually give you a folder with information. And if there is a moment, you could look up that person just like by Googling to see if there's any information online about them. Sometimes they'll give you a little biography. That's really great, but sometimes they'll just give you a name. And so I just remember just Googling the professor or the clinician and learning a few things about them. That's it. There wasn't anything, I didn't get any biographies, but yeah, it was any books about them, but it was great to know just a little bit about them because they know a lot about you. When I was on the committee, I had read the essays multiple times. I'd read the application. I'd read all the different activities, so I knew a lot about this person, and it was great when when we had some sort of flowing conversation, and I could see that they were engaged, and they'd also, with me, it was difficult because I was a medical student, but when they would ask questions about something that like potentially we were interested in. So you have that time. So one-on-one, you have that time, do a little bit of research if you can, and then you'll go in, introduce yourself, and it's usually a 30 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes less, interview one-on-one. We talked about the general tips for these. You have prepared for their questions. You're going to answer them honestly. You know your CV. You know your activities very well, the research, the community. So that's not an issue. Have fun. Take your time to answer. Relax. They know you're stressed, so it's okay. They know that you're stressed. Honesty, passion, and I enjoy getting 30 minutes with this person who's probably really dedicated to the community, really dedicated to making sure that the medical school is doing well, to his patients, to the residents, the medical students, to the fellows. So it's really fantastic. Usually it's like 20, usually there's some large percentage where they're asking you questions, either about what you've done or about the school. And then usually there's a little time left over, 5-10 minutes at the end for you to ask some questions. And I think you should take the time to do that. Ask them anything that you want. I know that there's so many questions, and sometimes it's hard to think about which one, but you prepare for that as well. And like I said previously, ask them anything from what they think about soccer or what they think about the iPhone. That would be an interesting thing if somebody asked me that. Versus, tell me a little bit about how do medical students succeed here, or what are you looking for in applicants that is not like a traditional sense, strong letters and good grades, and just talk to them. And I think you'll do well there if you really care about the questions that you're asking. And then lastly, so those are the one-on-one interviews. Then more and more institutions are doing these, what are called multiple mini interviews, where you, instead of usually talking with 1 or 2 people for 30 minutes, you talk for 5 minutes with 8 people, kind of like a round robin, kind of like speed dating, where you sit down, like in the movies, you talk to somebody for 5 minutes, maybe you like them, maybe you don't, then you move over to the next person. So it's kind of like that concept, but here, everybody's nice and friendly. So, and most of the time, the topics are kind of like they're abstract. They're certainly not about knowledge. You don't really need any knowledge to answer a lot of these questions. So a lot of times they'll ask you things like, tell me a little bit about what you think about art, or what is a good book that you've read, or things like if you see somebody fall to the ground, or you see somebody that have maybe pushed some other person to the ground, how would you handle that situation? And they're not looking. There's not really. I mean, there could be egregious answers to that, but that's not what we're talking about. So, the idea is that there's some clear and cohesive thought that has been that will be produced by you in just a short time. So, I think the key to those is to kind of take maybe a second or two to think about the question, and then just provide an honest answer. It doesn't have to be as long as the interview. It's usually for like 5 minutes or 6 minutes. They can be a little bit shorter because they can ask you some other questions, as well as maybe have a chance for them to clarify certain arguments that you made, let's say, and then kind of wrapping it up at the end. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Learned something interesting about iPhones. And moving forward. And then so that's one interview, one small interview, 5 minutes. You usually have a 1 minute break while the person kind of rates you. And then you go to the next one, and you do that 8 times. And the thought is, now there's 8 people who get to evaluate you. Maybe that's more fair than just 2 people, because you can imagine that when you have your one-on-one interview, if one thing just doesn't go well, there's something that happened for whatever reason, that's 50% value that the person is giving, and that could be quite unfair. Versus if you distribute it to more people, then the general tendency, I think, appears more true. So, now if 6 people say bad things, then that's a little bit more believable than on like 1 and 2. So nobody's gonna say anything bad about you're at that stage. You have gotten an interview. It's great. So preparing for those both is key. Prepare for them by knowing what the school will interview, which modality, so to say, will provide that day, either one-on-one or MMIs, multiple mini interviews. And then again, preparing with significant other, with friends, if you're in college, some of your classmates, 30-minute interview where they ask you questions, or multiple mini interviews where they can ask you about anything. So I think we're getting near wrapping up. The thought is that you've done very well at this point. You've gotten an interview, and that's really an amazing achievement. And so take the time to respect that. Really kind of, good job, as well as I need to work hard to really make sure that this goes as well as it can. As you work really hard in the application, you work really hard for studying, as you work really hard in all the other manners of your extracurricular activities. So being prepared, knowing that it's a stressful situation, and thus taking the time to answer questions as honestly as possible. And then passion, enthusiasm, and asking them questions is the few tips that I have that I think kind of will go a long way. Knowing if there'll be one-on-one interviews versus multiple mini interviews is also good, so you can prepare. And then just practicing. Practicing is key. So thank you all for the time that you've sat here with me. It really was just so great, an honor and privilege again to do this. Hope it was helpful. If there's any questions that I didn't get to today, or if you have any more questions for us, don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email us at hq@medschooltutors.com, or the phone number is 212-327-0098. And you all have an excellent day. Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.